And one. Good evening, Canby, and welcome to our regularly scheduled meeting, Monday, June 24th, for the Canby Planning Commission. We will get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First item up is consent item for draft meeting minutes dated June 10th, 2024. Do we have a motion on those draft meeting minutes?
Chair Ellison, just to note that they have been corrected to identify a 5-1 vote in the minutes. Just that was a change from what was in the packet.
Mm-hmm. Correct. In that, so we've got two consent, right? So you have the draft meeting minutes for the meeting entirety.
I'm sorry for the findings I was speaking of, not the meeting minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so draft meeting minutes, we're going to do a motion for approval of the draft meeting minutes.
I move we accept the draft meeting minutes from June 10th, 2024.
A second?
A second.
Very well. We will take a roll call vote, starting with Commissioner Driscoll.
Aye. Aye.
Commissioner Drosh, and myself is an aye. Commissioner Ewert will abstain.
No,
Oh,
I'm abstaining from the findings.
very, very well. Commissioner Ewert is an aye, and
Aye.
an aye. Ayes have it. The draft meeting minutes for June 10th are approved by a vote of 5-0. Next up is the final findings, TA 23-03 Housing Needs Analysis. Do we have a motion to approve those final findings as written?
I move we accept the final findings from TA 23-03/CPA 2401 Housing Needs Analysis.
Do we have a second?
A second.
Again, by roll call vote, starting with Commissioner Driscoll.
Aye.
Very well. And Commissioner Drosh is an aye.
Aye.
I am an aye. Commissioner
Abstain.
Ewert abstains, and Commissioner
Aye.
Hutchinson, aye. All right, the final findings, TA 23-03 Housing Needs Analysis is approved by a vote of 4 aye, 1 abstain. Moving on to citizen input for non-agenda items. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on non-agenda items. Each person will be given 3 minutes to speak. Staff and the Planning Commission will make every effort to respond to the questions raised during citizens' input before the meeting ends or as quickly as possible thereafter. You may speak on non-agenda items via Zoom. To use Zoom, please send an email to publiccomments@cambyoregon.gov no later than 3 p.m. on the day of the Planning Commission meeting, and provide your name and topic you would like to speak on and your phone number. We have no citizen input, correct?
Jessica and Matt, could you, sorry. Come on up. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Sit down or stand or?
No, please, have a seat.
Okay.
Name and address, please.
My name is Josh Kirkman, and the address I own is 939 North Redwood Street.
North Redwood. Great. What can we help you with, Josh?
So it's a 2.4 acre property that I acquired about a year ago, and it's not within city limits. And so I'd like to annex it in and develop that property, and just wanted to know, like, I'm not a developer, I'm not a big business tycoon or anything like that. So I'm kind of wondering what the city needs. I mean, would it be more beneficial to try to approach it as apartments or more on a commercial side? I don't really know what they need. Single-family homes, it seems like there's a fair amount of those. And it's right off of, just so people understand, if you know where Fred Meyer's is, across the street, there's the power substation, and it's literally right behind that. And so half of the property is viewable from 99. And so just wanted you guys' feedback, what your feelings are on it. I'd like to develop it, but I don't know what would best suit the needs of Canby.
Josh, I think I would defer to start with Planning Director Hardy. He's going to be the
Yeah, and
authority
Josh,
on
some
that.
context here. I think Josh and I have spoken briefly, and this is not necessarily something I'm going to give a ton of information on, but just an overview. His property is currently outside of the city limits in the urban growth boundary. We have pre-designations of property in our comprehensive plan, and so I think part of that process on those pre-designations on comprehensive plans will be taken up in the comprehensive plan update process. Planning Commission's role on that will be bringing forward policies goals and policies to the Planning Commission. We will also be identifying purpose statements, which we are missing for comprehensive plan designations, which will then permeate into zoning as well. We, as staff, were planning to use that as our tool to identify, to give applicants the ability to have more metrics on measuring their property against, if there's a pre-designation, let's say it's R1, and there's a pre-designation already there, how do I get to 1.5 or 2? What are the parameters around that? We will be sunsetting kind of our process here will be looking, there's special areas as well, which his property's not in. We'll be sunsetting those, but we'll be reestablishing better parameters. So when things go to the Planning Commission for recommendation of the council, there'll be more identification of that. That's kind of the basis of this. We are not, as staff, really planning to go in and do a comprehensive plan change across the entire city, with one exception dealing with special area J that has very specific parameters around it. The Walnut Street extension is in there. There'll be more coming on that. But we're rather giving applicants the ability to look at that process on goals and policies and purpose statements, which will then permeate back into that process of annexation, rezone, and development concept plans that will be first saw by the Planning Commission and then recommended to the council. Hopefully that makes sense.
Sort of. But if I'm Josh, the homeowner who doesn't participate maybe in all these meetings that haven't had the year lead up to understanding a lot of this, I would imagine we're going to get more questions like that, like, you know, what can I do, what's possible, and what I'm hearing you say is that tools are coming in order to help Josh.
They will be,
make
and
those
there'll be
decisions.
public input on that, so maybe, thank you. So encouraging folks as we get into that, and this will be, we did Summit 4, thank you for those that attended Summit 4, there'll be a Summit 5 in the fall. We're going to start to get into more of that. We're just starting to identify policies and goals as a staff review level. We have them, they've been drafted by our consultant. We're starting to dive into that. So when we get to Summit 5, by that point, which is in the fall, that's when we can interface absolutely with property owners and they can see what are we looking at, what are the parameters around this. So it's not so murky. Right now, it's pretty murky. If you want to do something beyond the current designation that's on your property, it's pretty challenging. So that's hopefully going to provide some parameters for owners.
So you've got the two processes, which is one, just to be able to annex in, right? And then the second is to address the zoning once you've done that.
So we're only dealing with the comprehensive plan, and so basically, exactly. So the comprehensive plan part is giving more parameters on that. So when the zoning does come in, there'll be parameters around, you know, am I or am I not consistent with something that's beyond my pre-designation? That's the goal in the end.
Okay.
There's quite a bit of work to be done on that because we currently don't have a lot of parameters around this. And so applicants kind of go in without a lot of detail, and fairly subjective right now. I mean, I think we're going to have to define that, and there'll be a lot of discussions with Planning Commission on that as well.
So I know there's discussions with people who are kind of on the outskirts of the existing city borders who are given the option to annex in. Are they going to have information about what their options are to take the current zoning designation that the land has and what all of their options are before they make that choice to annex in? Is this just kind of fact-finding with the conversations we're having with homeowners who are in his position?
There's two levels. So we have the current city limits and the current urban growth boundary. That's the comprehensive plan that will be first adopted. Then there'll be an urban growth boundary initiation process. There'll be identification, absolutely, of those property owners on what the intention is. We will have to signal that intention because in order to make it the urban growth boundary expansion process, we have to fulfill the residential, and then we also have to be looking at the employment objectives on acreage from the economic opportunity analysis. So those will be both signaled. The exact zoning that'll happen outside of the city limits probably will be reflective of the current zoning we have in the city, but it may end up being something different. The properties in the city and the current urban growth boundary will be reflective of those current zoning districts. And so what I'm saying is you may have employment, but we may choose some slight alteration of the zoning of that employment for those urban growth boundary areas. We have not made those decisions yet. It could marry exactly with our current zoning. It may or may not marry with that. Depends on kind of that whole process that we're dealing with. We absolutely will have residential and employment lands for the expansion area. It's just, I'm not sure if those will be identical to what we have now.
So Don, if I'm Josh, what would be a time frame? Again, you may have said it earlier, but I was trying to track with some of the
Sure.
factoids, but
So I would say going into the fall and winter and in specific, that will be a really critical time. I
Okay.
mean, there's many elements tonight. We're talking about housing, and so it's an opportune time, and Josh said he would come to one of the PC meetings. Ryan, did you have something?
Well, I mean, I guess the caveat is he could annex tomorrow or apply for an annexation tomorrow if he wanted to. It's just dependent on the underlying comprehensive plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I
there's
mean-
nothing forcing him to wait for our comp plan
No,
update.
there's, unless, the only thing I would say that there might be a benefit to having more definition on the policies and goals and the purpose statements if he were to contemplate something beyond the base zone that's pre-designated. Ryan, thank you. That's absolutely critical. We're not holding him up at all. He could go in tomorrow and change it to the current pre-designation. But right now, if he were to go in and try for something different, it would be more challenging.
Gotcha.
Because and again, not to say that we're going to carve it out and make it easier for him to do that or not, but at least it'd be clearer than it is now, if that makes sense.
does that help
That,
somewhat, Josh?
I was more asking the commission,
What do you need?
what do you guys need? Yes. So,
I would say, based on what we've seen from the housing needs analysis, we need a mixture of single detached, high density. We're even looking at cottage developments from a housing perspective. From the business perspective, I don't know, we haven't really got too much into the commercial side, right? But everything that we addressed in this latest housing needs analysis spoke to a lot of, the overwhelming majority, I think I shouldn't say overwhelming majority. The majority was single detached. The second runner-up was the high density, and I can't remember.
Townhomes and duplexes.
Townhomes and duplexes, and then I think apartments was kind of toward the bottom end of that list. So if that helps prioritize for you.
it does. So, I'm going to give my feedback on that parcel. It's a kind of in a unique spot. It's right across the street from a grocery store. There's a bus stop and medical facility right there. And so it kind of lends itself to, in my mind, I think it'd be a great spot for low income because it gives them a lot of access to things that if they can't travel well, they have almost everything they need really within walking distance. And so that's kind of where I was leaning, but again, there's so much more to making something like that happen, but, okay. I think that mostly answered it. So I appreciate the time. I don't know this, Paul. Am I supposed to just end now or what? I don't-
It's totally fine. Thank you for coming up and speaking.
Okay, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
All right, have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other citizen input? Laney? None? Okay. Moving on to old business, there's none. New business, none. Public hearings, none. So that means we're going to move into a planning commission work session, and the purpose of tonight's work session is to give the planning commission the opportunity to discuss housing efficiency measures. Good timing. To make the most of the short time we're given for these meetings, public comment will not be taken. This is appropriate under Oregon Public Meetings Law. Instead, we invite the public to comment at all of the Planning Commission regular meetings under either of the two opportunities dedicated on each agenda for public comment. In addition, we invite the public to contact city staff with comments or concerns. Although this is a public meeting, the Planning Commission cannot make any formal decision in a work session. Next step actions are often determined for deliberation and discussion at a properly noticed Planning Commission meeting. So with that, I will turn it over to Planning Director Hardy to discuss housing efficiency measures.
Good evening, Chair Ellison and Commissioners. Just a few introductions tonight. Jessica Herzog and Matt Robinson with Dowell will be giving us a presentation tonight as we continue our discussion on housing efficiency measures, joined by staff Ryan Potter, Lainey Faust, and Emily Sassy. Just wanted to kind of give a brief overview. Again, it's been a little while since we visited this topic, but just in context, and it's kind of appropriate that there was a recommendation by Planning Commission for the housing needs analysis being forwarded to council for their July 17 meeting for adoption. With that housing needs analysis, and Chair Olson, you spoke briefly about that with the previous speaker here, there definitely is an identification of housing needs. They're pretty much across the board, but in specific on the housing efficiency measures, we've chosen some what we believe would be near-term items. It's not the entire portfolio of items that will be done for housing over the journey and this process of the housing production strategy work, and I'll get into that in a minute, but it is in context, it gives 3 items that are near term that we work with DLCD on. Those would be cottage clusters, plan unit development revisions, and allowing for more flexibility of housing and commercial C2 and CM in specific on south side of 99E. I think that just in context here, there are other changes that will likely happen over the next 8 years, and you will also be seeing the housing production strategy paralleling the housing efficiency measures, and those will get into more strategies about these are strategies, and then you'll start to see those become code over time, but they're more conceptual. What is really important about the housing efficiency measures is they are critical to our urban growth boundary expansion because we have to show that we are using land efficiently. The parameters around these are somewhat loose in terms of you have to have some efficiency measures, and we work with the LCD, and they've agreed that these 3 are acceptable. But in order for us to be able to do an urban growth boundary expansion, we have to adopt these measures to show that we are in fact using our land efficiently and also targeting housing needs. As we've talked about before, housing needs are challenging in terms of price point. That's not really a focus tonight, but it's about the variety of product that provides that opportunity to be less expensive, but it also allows for the variety that the housing needs analysis identifies. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jessica and Matt to go through the presentation. It's going to be interactive. Ryan and I both will be speaking as well. We'll have some break points here as well. And if you have questions while we're going through, please interject. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
Great.
Great, thanks very much. Is this on?
You are
Yeah,
on
okay,
and
good.
live, yes.
Making sure. All right. All right, good. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see everyone. I don't know if you remember, I was here with you in the fall, late November, so it's nice to see you all again. As Dawn mentioned, we're using our work session tonight to provide some context and some development examples. That was one thing we heard pretty loud and clear from November, that we wanted to see some examples of what this could look like. And so Matt and myself, working closely with Dawn and Ryan, have come up with some examples, which was provided to you in a memorandum before tonight, but we're going to go over those in detail this evening. I don't know if we have a clicker or if I just, okay. So quick high-level look at our meeting purpose today. So Dawn has actually already covered our housing needs, a summary of what came out of that analysis that was conducted. We are going to take a quick walk through those middle housing types just to refresh our memories about what we're targeting here, and then moving into those development scenarios, which we'll be focusing on cottage housing, planned unit development, and that commercial mixed-use piece. Dawn, you kind of covered this at the beginning of your intro, but if you'd like to have some additional comments here, feel free.
No, I kind of jumped ahead, so please go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Perfect. So here is a graphic I believe you guys saw during the first phase of this project work with Matt last year. But this is a good graphic showing some middle housing product types. And you can see this transition from left to right between that low density residential all the way to that high mid-rise on the far right side. But we are targeting middle housing as part of this efficiency assessment. So looking at opportunities for townhomes, duplex and triplex, and then that cottage housing, which is not currently in your code. So just a quick refresher there about the goals here. And first, and probably the most significant update that we've been talking about over the last few months is the inclusion of cottage cluster standards in the city's code. It is not something that's currently there. Wanted to take a minute here just to talk high level about the idea of these cottage clusters. So on the left side of your screen is an example and a diagram that's pulled from DLCD's cottage cluster model code. So looking at kind of the main components of a cottage cluster, you can see the housing units generally oriented around a common courtyard or open space area at the center. In this example, we see both kind of consolidated parking as well as individual parking, so different opportunities for ways to address parking for those units. There's a increased focus for pedestrian connectivity through the site. You can see that with the sidewalks. And then there is even some discussion of screening, if you can see there towards the bottom end of the example there next to parking. Nice little example to the right there of a cottage cluster that has been developed, just to kind of, again, give us our bearings for what we're trying to get after with the proposed code updates. And moving into a couple of examples that we did do some research on to provide some guidance back to the Planning Commission tonight on what we've seen actually get constructed in the communities around us, and then also how it ties back to the proposed code updates we have. So this project here is First Avenue Cottages. It's out in Wilsonville. As you can see, it looks very similar to what we were looking at a moment ago with that diagram. You can see cottage units surrounding a common courtyard or open space area. This particular project has parking that's connected to the existing homes, or excuse me, the homes themselves. So rather than a consolidated parking area, you see driveways attached to garages. But there is some street parking as well, so opportunities for guest parking for this particular community. You do see on this, I think there's, look at my notes, there's like 9 cottages, I think. 9? Okay, got it right. 9 cottages here, so that's really in line with what we're seeing for kind of that midpoint. Oftentimes you see a minimum of 4 cottages per unit up to about 12. There's kind of a best practice for how many units can be around those open space areas. So this one's sitting kind of in the middle. You can see again that pedestrian connectivity kind of circling the middle of that open space area. This project, it was a larger site. It's just shy of 1.5 acres, so you're sitting at about 7 units per acre for density, which is probably on the lower end for cottages, but really you can see the characteristics clearly here about kind of the benefits and the look and feel of this community being a little bit different than what you would see for typical detached single family. I think the other thing to just note here is it is kind of embedded and nestled with existing residential along the periphery. So it looks like you might have a question. No?
Me?
Yeah.
I was just counting rooftops.
okay. Oh, you're checking
I
my
counted
math?
10. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I thought it was new math.
No.
I am a planner, not an
Old school.
engineer. That's the joke, right? All right, we'll advance to the next example. This one is the Green at Philida Park. This is in Vancouver, Washington, so just north of the river. This cottage development has a very similar look and feel to it as the one before. I think what's interesting about this one is it's got a couple of smaller, if you look closely, it's got a couple of smaller courtyards. So a grouping of 8 units, and they've kind of got these almost isolated little courtyards in the middle. You do see with this particular example, an actual shared parking lot, but it's also got garages. So the units themselves don't have attached garages or driveways, but you do see that consolidated parking and then some additional private garage parking as well, just in kind of a more unique consolidated fashion. This project includes a shared kind of amenity building, so it's kind of nestled in the middle there, but it's a good example of some variety in what you can do with your open space and your shared uses for these communities, so that opportunity to have outdoor areas that have a more year-round feel for us, since we are living in a climate where we see rain a lot. So characteristics for this particular project that are similar to what we're proposing for Canby include the ability to have a building that's shared and meet that open space need. This does have, again, that 8 unit count, so there is a limit to the number of units you can have here. There is a square footage maximum on this development as well. I think it's similar to what we're showing for Canby. It's 800 square foot minimum, 1,200 maximum, so they do have limits on how big those can be. And then this particular project is a little bit more dense. It's about 11.5 units per acre based on the layout here. So what I really think is great about this community, and I actually found it a little bit before I got put onto this project, so it was kind of great to be able to bring a real world example to this project. But it's nestled in the midst of existing single family, both kind of traditional 10,000-ish square foot lots, but also larger ones. You can kind of see in this image across the way, there's a much larger site that's not really fully built out, but they've done a great job of kind of blending it into the neighborhood. And there's even some commercial mixed use kind of in the north, if you're like the upper right corner of this picture. So it doesn't feel out of place, even though it's a unique product type that maybe hasn't been built a lot in the community. So, and again, ties very closely with the code recommendations we've made to Canby. With that, I wanted to take a pause and talk through, or maybe just offer it up for open discussion about questions about these particular examples, or thoughts about the proposed, code updates and what you guys are envisioning for this, so we can get a little feedback and refine our proposal.
On those 2 examples, just curious if you happen to be familiar with price points for what we saw there. Is it in the $500,000 range, something like that?
So as part of this exercise, we have not looked at housing price. We really, honestly, it's challenging to do that. Fixtures make a lot of difference. If I remember right, we've talked before, and you're in the construction industry, right?
Yeah.
So, those finishings can make a big difference on what the price is. And so as part of this exercise, it's really about looking at variety in housing. We can't really control what the price
Sure.
point will be.
Sure.
Do we have any idea what's the average age of the people purchasing those?
Yeah, I don't think we do.
No.
That'd be interesting.
I'm not sure who might have that kind of information. It'd be interesting, but.
Yeah, I mean,
Walk around.
it's something we might be able to get more information on. It's a great question.
Yeah, piggybacking on that, a concern that I would have with something like this Green at Felita Park is I'm glad that they have a covered shared space for people to get outside, but there's no place for kids to play. That tiny little green circle and the mulch outside of those buildings, if it's an older couple or it was somebody who wanted a home that doesn't have a family, it might be a little bit more functional. A concern of this kind of layout is that it doesn't help that segment of the population that can't afford a single-family home, but lives the lifestyle of somebody who would want a single-family home, kind of the same opportunities.
I think that's a great point. I think I would just add that our proposed code updates don't necessarily require
this
that
layout. Oh, I know.
particular,
Yeah.
design for the shared open space. But it's a good point, and I think there's different ways I've seen codes handle this. I think a couple of the ones that I'm familiar with north of the river, they require both private open space for each unit as well as that shared open space. So there are different ways I think you can get at potentially providing enough space. But I think it also comes down to a buyer's preferences, right? And the idea here is to not 100% mimic a single-family detached home. The idea is to provide that variety. And so I think the code is intended to make sure we have those open space amenities, but not necessarily program it so much that it takes away flexibility for the, modifications for that particular development, given contextual considerations. So,
And I would just add, I'm familiar with the location here. There's a park within a half mile of this. I mean, again, there's a balance here. It's super challenging to create affordability and have giant spaces for people that, it's just a dynamic. And I think it's really trying to find a price point in a livable community that still works. It may not balance in every case. These are not apartments, so these are single-family homes, and I think there may be some differentiation on that sense as well.
The living experience would be like living in an apartment with a layout specifically like this.
The Fir Avenue cottages, the ones before this, are more generous with their green space.
Certainly.
And so it seems like, if you could have both of those kinds within a community, then, you could spend your square footage on yard as opposed to structure and have that option. But, I know a lot of young people who really are not interested in yard care at all, but they want to not share a wall with a neighbor.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what the second group, the Vancouver, Washington properties are catering more to that crowd. That's, not boat and RV people, I don't think. Whereas it looks like you could maybe have a boat in the Fir Avenue cottages, and depending on what the regulations of the neighborhood were.
Yeah, I'd say the Fir Avenue cottages, the Fir Avenue cottages, Wilsonville actually has a cottage code that's very similar to the DLCD model code, which in general, a lot of Oregon jurisdictions kind of start with that and tinker with it to make it more compatible with the community. But I think the Fir Avenue cottages is a good example of the type of developments that can occur from a code like we're proposing in Canby. And I think this one's a good example of having, at some of the past work sessions, we talked about having more generous front yard setbacks. And this is definitely a good example of that, where you have 15, 20-foot setbacks off the front that kind of promotes that compatibility with existing development patterns in the neighborhood, as well as having quite a bit of open space to the rear.
I'd agree. I'd say Fir Avenue captures the sentiment the most out of anything we've seen and taken into account everything everybody's talked about. I personally would rather see that than rows and rows and rows and rows of townhomes or row homes or whatever you would call them these days, and apartments. I think they're the style and the aesthetic of them fit the community a lot better, I think.
I may be just a little bit dense, which probably doesn't surprise most of you, but I do not understand why we're spending so much time talking about cottage clusters. We have been talking about them for 2 years now. We've got zoning. If we want to add this into the existing zoning that we have, rather than spending so much time, and we have housing like this. I look at this Fir Avenue cottage thing. That's really not that much different than down here on Second Street, down in what we used to call the Honda pits. I mean, it's the same thing. It's a little bit different, but it's basically the same thing. There's more of them down there, but they could have been sectioned out and made smaller. So I guess somebody needs to sell me on the idea of why we're spending so much time and money talking about cottage clusters and having to add them to our zoning. I guess that's my question. I don't get it. I really don't. I think we can accomplish this. If we had a builder come in and want to build this Fir Avenue cottages in our town, I think we could adapt to that and make that work. I just don't, we have spent thousands of dollars talking about cottage clusters, and I just don't understand it. I'm sorry, but that's just.
And maybe to answer your question, and I'll take a shot at that. I think that if the current code is used, it will not look like this. I mean, that's really where we're at, and we do not have a code that will end up looking like this product. And
Well, then how did we pull off Second Street and the Honda pits down there? How did that
it's
happen?
probably a planned unit development, and maybe that was, this is before my time, and I think
Right.
it's probably a PUD that was more in light of that, but in terms of,
It was.
yeah, and so that's more, and again, we're going to talk about PUDs as well next
Okay.
in that process.
But the zoning is more dense for that.
sorry?
That particular area, it has a R2 zoning instead of like the 1 or the 1.5. So I think some of it is, could we build more flexibility to build something like this, where some of the homes might be a little bit bigger than the Honda Pit? What
Okay.
what is that called?
So the-
Darcy Estates.
Okay, I just think we could make it work. It's not like we're so strict and hard line. I think we could make it work without having to spend so much time
No,
recreating the wheel.
You guys have been inundated with a lot of information over and over again, so
Okay, I just,
information received. I think part of that is trying to answer questions, because I feel like a lot of these are new for Canby. These products don't exist here. I mean, it's single-family detached with some semblance of space around it versus like jam the house in, which is kind of what our current zoning is. If you compare this to R15, you're not going to get this look in R15. I can tell you that's not going to happen. So I think, but without that mechanism, I mean, the R2, that was probably a PUD, and that was before my time, but we'll talk about PUDs and I'm not sure what they did and they didn't do down there, but I think it might look similar, but on a single-family detached product type with commonalities around it, we don't have code elements that really specifically identify that to a point where a developer would say, yeah, I'm convinced about the product and I will actually do the product, and the metrics of that are defined.
I have a bit of an answer with documentation we've been provided already. Exhibit 26 of the Housing Need Development talks about single-family small lot. And it's something that we've bumped up against this category again and again without perfectly defining what's there, because there are a bunch of products that kind of need to be there, but Canby doesn't have a place for them. And there is some pressure from the state to, move towards row houses and things of that nature. And if we don't provide other opportunities, maybe other than row houses, that maybe suit the character of the community better, such as cottage clusters, then we're going to be, the state will just say, row houses for you. We're just going to open up.
It'll
the-
just
and
look
that's-
like
but
Hillsborough.
we did the
You
same,
know.
we did the same thing over by, what's the care facility that's over off of 13th? No, the small one. Huh? The little, what is it? Yeah, Radcliffe, okay. So all of those houses that were next to Radcliffe they were houses like this. We went through a process, we let them have smaller lots, we let them have smaller houses. there was, the whole piece of it, but we made it work. And they came back to us, I don't know, what was it, 3-4 years after? And it didn't work. They couldn't sell them, and they just wanted to turn them into just regular houses and sell them as such. And we had to change it and do it. But we modified what we had to make it work. And so I guess we have bumped up against this several times over the last 20 years, and we've made inroads. We've tried to make it work. Now, granted, maybe the economic times and the product or whatever is different now. But
There's
what
the paperwork only option is one of the things that's different, correct? I mean, isn't there has to be a paperwork only option circumventing any sort of judgment by this panel to pretty much any form of development?
Well, I mean, part of this is, and this is, there are clear and objective standards. This is a middle housing type. I mean, and to that point, this still may end up being reviewed by the Planning Commission. That decision has not been made. Most jurisdictions do not have planning commissions review cottage cluster. They're type 2, they're administrative reviews. There's not a court case so far against a jurisdiction saying, type 3 is prohibitive, but the level of discretion is intended to be minimal on these based on, it's basically form-based design that's in the cottage cluster parameters around that. I do think that these are smaller housing footprint types. And Commissioner Ewert, to your point, there might have historically been other products that worked. I think right now is just a very challenging time for, I would say it's probably the most challenging time we've had in housing prices, probably in my lifetime for sure. I'm not sure in your lifetime, but I think that's part of what we're trying to address. I mean, and again, maybe those past products and maybe there are PUDs that address that. Again, the toolbox is just not very big in Canby, and if we don't have parameters around giving more tools in the toolbox, I think that's the ultimate answer, is we will not have, we'll even have less affordable or more affordable type of housing.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not going to belabor the point. It just seems like we're spending a lot of time and money talking about these things, and we've already been there, done that, and on several different levels. And we may not have it down in black and white, but I think that we probably, as a community, can show due diligence. If the state comes banging on the door and saying, my God, you need to do this, we can say, we've done this in the past, and we will continue to do it in the future for any developer that wants to come in and move on. But I just don't quite understand why we're spending quite so much time, because we've done this. And I will just revisit the point. They build one of those right there, and if he can sell it for $500,000, I don't care how many square feet it is, if he can sell it for $500,000, he's going to sell it for $500,000. It doesn't make any difference what we would like for him to do as far as affordable housing or anything else. I think we're asking the wrong questions here, but that's my comment. I will not belabor the idea any further.
Thank you for your comments. And I think maybe just one last piece, the next level we'll be hearing, you'll be seeing this in hearing mode. So hopefully that will be helpful.
So
Any
the
other questions on cottage cluster?
Yeah, or I guess a bit of a comment. Like, the reason that I've repeatedly brought up having usable open space that is a safe space for kids to play in is because we don't have that many parks, if we're honest about it. We do not have a whole lot of parks in Canby. They're not super accessible. So if we're going to need to build like this to be able to get more housing in and serve more individuals and families, we need to, I think, make it a priority to have some safe space and/or a requirement that you need to be X amount of very reasonable space away from a park. We're hoping that over the next 20 years, we're going to be putting in some more parkland, and that's great. So maybe that could be the qualification for how much open space you need in your development is your proximity to existing green space park structures, not like, I don't know if it's like a sports complex or something, maybe that doesn't count. Just something where you are out there, there are trees, there are grass, you can run around and play. Like, I'd really like to see us prioritize that for Canby as a community, because I think that's a big reason why a lot of us are here. We didn't want to live in a super dense urban area. We didn't want to not have that opportunity for our kids, grandkids, people who are visiting us, whatever. I think that that's kind of important to the community. And I think that's also a way that we can kind of balance more density with maintaining that quality of life that's important to people. So it doesn't necessarily have to be part of the cottage cluster every single time, but I think it should be at least adjacent. And personally, I like the idea of covered shared spaces as something to consider, regardless of if you need green space or not, just because when you have, especially the more dense representations of some of these, they don't really have any space to call their own. So it'd be nice to have a space for people to come and hang out and visit or have a party or something. The ones we're looking here in Wilsonville, those are huge. Those are basically single-family houses crammed together. This is for the people who don't want to have to maintain their own yard. And that's great for them. But some of these other middle housing are going to be a lot more dense. And then those are some of the situations that I'd really like to look out for individuals buying these homes and then their families and their interests that way.
Jessica or Matt, maybe you can answer this one on for example, when you were talking about the maximum 1,200, minimum 800, does Fir Avenue cottages and then the one in Vancouver, did they fall into that same criteria? The maximum is 1,200, the minimum is 800?
So we do have the staff report for this particular project. We were able to grab that, and I think that the staff report that approved the concept had 8 to 1,200 units as a standard. I don't know if they got their building permits and did anything different from that, but at the time that it was approved through the planning process, the sizes was 8 to 12. We do not have the same information on Fir Avenue that I'm aware of. They do look large.
They look considerably larger, yeah.
Yeah, we could certainly find that out about the Fir Avenue cottages, but kind of like what I was mentioning earlier, Wilsonville's cottage cluster code is based off of the DLCD model code, and I would guess that those are probably right at that 1,200 square foot range. And then, most of these cottage codes, the garage area is exempt, and so all of those in that Fir Avenue cottages, they have attached garages as part of the structure, so it kind of adds some square footage to the structure that's not actually counted for the purpose of meeting development code. Yeah. But yeah, those are definitely on the larger side versus some of the examples we've talked about.
So
Correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're proposing here is an 800 square foot home for families to live in, 800 square feet,
8 to 12.
8 to 12.
It's roughly the size of a 2-bedroom apartment.
And I think the distinction too is we're not saying that these have to be for all families. We're providing variety. The intention is to offer opportunities for a different type of housing product. I agree that families are looking for housing, but we obviously can't guarantee that every person that buys one of these is going to have young children.
Sure.
Because I think in Hope Village, the ones that they're building now are they're 12,000 to 1,200 and a little bit bigger than that, and some of them.
They're what?
At Hope Village.
No, I mean, how many?
1,000, about 1,000 to 1,200, a little bit bigger, I think, is what they're, and that's for 2 people.
I think the reason we keep coming back to saying families is because when you consider the cost of these things, I would put money on that these cottages in Wilsonville cost 6 and upwards, and that the ones in Vancouver are at least 5, even though they're tiny. And so when you just look at the reality of what that costs, if you are a family and you need a house and you don't have $100,000 or $120,000 to put down as your 20% down payment, you're looking at least a $5,000 a month mortgage payment. That's before you've done anything else in your life, which there are so many other things that you need, not just, the basics of like food and, security, but then you've got, insurance and a car payment and whatever clothes your kids need and just anything you want to do with your life or other existing debt. So that's why I keep coming back to families. It might not be families. There are other people who are going to want them too, because everybody needs housing. We don't have enough of it. But I think realistically, you're going to see a lot of families who this is their only option. And so that's where my concern comes from.
But but in the context of like the housing needs analysis, right, this is just one.
Yeah.
It's
of,
one
like-
tool, and we're going to start talking about attached product within PUDs next. I mean, I think that's like townhomes. And again, I think to the point Jessica was making, we don't really control who is going to live in a home, obviously. That's not, I mean, we're just trying to provide the variety, and there will be a variety of people. I mean, there's been articles about people living in quite small cottage clusters in Bend. There's an article about a nurse who used to live in Portland downtown in a condo and got divorced and wanted to find something smaller and moved to Bend. And so there is a variety of, that he was single in that case, but there is a variety of people that would live in these, they're obviously a product that's being successful in the local area.
And to your point earlier, we're going through this exercise specifically on this because we just need to define what the code parameters are for this particular
It
product.
is, and this product is one, it's a product that could be chosen or not. If it's not in the code, it will not be used. There will be no choice whatsoever. Currently, our current code gives very little choice, and therefore, we're not addressing any really of the housing needs that are out there in the housing analysis study. It's essentially the core of that discussion. Is it enough? Like the metrics of this, we don't control all those forces. What do we control is the ability to provide variety.
Jessica and Matt, you want to proceed?
Yeah, if there aren't any other comments on cottages, I really liked your feedback, though. I think that's a really interesting idea to tie potentially a change in open space requirements relative to your proximity to open space areas. I've seen that a lot in parking, where if you're in kind of a more densely populated center where you might have access to transit, and these are in bigger cities where transit is more beneficial for those folks living along those transit lines. But you see that a lot with reductions in parking. So it's a great opportunity, I think, to provide some variety for folks to see a little bit of variation in the different cottage opportunities.
Yeah, and it
based on
helps
where
us
they're
keep
at.
that focus on growing our green space and making it accessible to people. So it's not just kind of over there and nobody uses it.
Well, yeah, and the other thing too is this is requiring that shared open space, which is a community builder, right? That is philosophically something that we don't see in your typical R zones. You see your personal lot needs to be this big, and that lot's going to be, I guarantee, wrapped around with a 6-foot fence that nobody can see into. And so these are opportunities and different product types that encourage and incentivize and even require that open space. So it creates that community feel as well.
And you mentioned parking, and this is something I'm passionate about. I would, to the extent that we can, I really think anything that's being built new should require that the road is big enough to park cars on both sides and still have two-way traffic in between. And that if you are infilling in an area where that road is not like that, that more parking is required somehow. Because we have some streets that are just only one lane of traffic if there's cars on both sides. We see a lot of that when we go to talk about the commercial area. And I really want to keep considering that because as somebody who has lived in Portland on a skinny street where people park on both sides, it's really a nightmare to deal with. And on average, people in Canby have larger than average cars on top of all else. And regardless of the size of your car, whatever your housing ends up being, temporary or permanent for you, it's really important just to be able to have people come over and visit you. And so much of the housing that's been built in the Portland metro area in the last 20 years doesn't consider that. And it's in part because of the state's rules, like you only get X for, this. And so wherever we can, again, encourage that community and quality of life, because yes, you can have someone come and visit you. You can park and not have to walk a mile with your groceries to get to your front door. It would be really nice to kind of consider that because, yeah, I want more housing, but I don't want people's quality of life to suck.
Don, really quick along those lines, when we get into specifics about what we are going to, how we would zone cottage clusters. Will there be a point of vigorous debate for that and input? Or is it just simply getting a recommendation from Dow and then voting up or down on that?
There'll be code that we'll go through in specifics. This is applying to R1 and R15 zones, and so that would be really where this would come full circle is.
Great.
And it would be a recommendation from Planning Commission. I mean, council will want the recommendation from Planning Commission, but I think that our hope is, even though we're inundating you all with this, that this hopefully makes that easier when we get to the hearing. But that would be the basis of it, would be going through the code and more specifics, coming back, getting your input tonight, and then, really talking about this in detail, code language, and this is trying to give more of like what this might look like.
Great.
All right, so moving on to the planned unit development examples that we shared. So again, another opportunity to look at high level what planned unit developments are kind of intended for and how they've been used throughout Oregon and Washington to kind of help address some variety in development. So first and foremost, they're really intended to create some flexibility in existing development standards, but through a mechanism that incentivizes use and creation of open spaces. So, your typical code may say your lot needs to be exactly 10,000 square feet, whereas in a PUD, there's maybe an average lot size that can be applied. So there's some flexibility to account for, unique transportation infrastructure that may make those 10,000 square foot lots a little bit challenging to meet. And so it gives that ability to modify design a little bit for the greater good. This does also give communities an opportunity to get that open space that they maybe wouldn't otherwise, and so opportunities for that quality of life we were talking about a moment ago. You do often see a blend of housing types as part of the planned unit development. So another philosophical kind of benefit of this is that you look at a bigger scale, a larger area typically, so you can see how maybe that blend and that master planning can really come to fruition, and you can see that integration of different uses rather than piecemealing development. Oftentimes as well, as part of that housing mix and blend of product types, you often see a mix of densities. So, as a general rule, townhouses are on smaller lots, so you see more of them in a smaller area, and therefore they're more dense. And then single family detached is that less dense product. So with PUDs, often you see the ability to flex that density throughout the boundary of the planned unit development, while also taking into consideration maybe treatments along the perimeter of these PUDs to create that kind of compatibility and test and make sure that you're being compatible with those existing developments on the periphery. So high level, that's kind of philosophically what they're meant for and what we see often people use in the tools that are used in that concept. Now we'll jump into a couple of examples. So this first one is Reed's Crossing PUD. It's in Hillsborough. I apologize in advance. I know the graphic is hard to see, but I promise there aren't actually words there. There's just a couple at the top. So we'll talk high level about what this project is. It is a mixed community. So you will see kind of in the center there's a bunch of small lots which have various product types, single family detached, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes. It crosses kind of a mix of those middle housing types. There is some multifamily up in the kind of upper left-hand side of the screen. You see a barrage of green space throughout the site, which I think is perhaps the most compelling about this that I found is just this really extensive network of open space areas and pedestrian connectivity running throughout those particular kind of corridors, along with what you've got along the street. So this opportunity to really create that connection, but also have distinction about what is being built where. The other thing that's worth noting here is while it's a big site, it does have a lot of existing development on three sides of it. And so looking at how they selected product types along those edges to really blend in and kind of be compatible with that existing development scheme. Then this is a zoomed in view. So if you recall from that first image, there was that kind of north-south corridor. So this is looking at a different map that they have on their website for home sales. But I thought it was helpful for our discussion tonight. You'll see numbers on this map, but essentially they tie back to different product types to kind of show how there's this variety mixed in to that residential neighborhood up against that green space. So you've got combination of townhomes, single family. Paired homes are actually duplexes. It's just kind of a marketing tool, but I figured I'd throw the name out there it was the first time I'd heard that term used, but it's essentially a single family homes that are attached by a single wall. And then also, on that kind of upper left, you'll see multi-tenant commercial right across from that green space, but you can see that green space creates that buffer essentially from that higher intensity use and creates that insulation for the residential neighborhood. And then of course that integrated public open space.
Jessica? Quick question.
Yeah, of course.
I'm going to steal Vice Chair Ewert's comment. I may be a little dense, but how is this and cottage clusters not the same thing?
So it's a good question. So cottage clusters are a product type, and they have their own set of characteristics that make them a little bit unique. They are bite-sized, if you will, like, thinking about this, a PUD is on a grand scale and has certain product types. A cottage isn't any one of these things because that cottage in and of itself has to have that, at least as we've seen it in code throughout Oregon and Washington, has to have that small community courtyard. It's the scale that I think is different to me than a planned unit development. You have a limit to how many can be there and what it looks like.
So could a PUD have cottage clusters in it?
Yes, that is our
Okay.
proposal.
Okay.
But we just don't have cottage code, so we have to create it if we want to say you can have it there.
Okay.
Right? Otherwise, we're just picking from a menu of, because, the code does have single family detached. We do talk about townhomes and duplexes. The idea here in the codes that we're looking at modifying are about reducing barriers to utilizing those product types in PUDs, looking at different potential for the number of townhomes in a row, for example, going from 3 to 6 in a row before you have a break in building. Just different ways in which we can provide flexibility and reduce some of those barriers that have perhaps been, negatively affecting developers' interest in building that product type.
And Chair, also just to add to Jessica's comment, so PUDs and current code and what we would continue to propose, 15% of the site area is open space. So you're dealing with a big scale on a PUD or a larger scale, because to give 15% up. So what do you get in return for that? So there's this design component that comes with that is part of that discussion. That gives, with the flexibility for the open space, you also get some flexibility as a developer to have a variety of product types still under what we're proposing is still under the base zone. There's a density bonus if you give the 15% up that we would be looking at giving a bonus to make that up. But essentially the base zone is the driver for density. So we're not rezoning a property. It's just a matter of shuffling. You're kind of shuffling the land uses around, and in many cases they do work quite well together. They're all being planned out at once. So you don't get this kind of negativity about my house is bigger than your house kind of thing. They're all kind of combined into a community.
And I think, so looking at this graphic that's in front of you right now, in a more traditional suburban type of development that you would see maybe from the 70s or 80s is this same spot on this same map. On the west side, you would have just a sea of the exact same lot over and over and over again, and you'd have 200 of them. And maybe on the right side, you would have 300 of exactly the same lot size and unit type and a sea of them. And what the PUD lets you do is push and pull densities and push and pull arrangements. And then what that allows you, like Donna's saying, is, as you can see on the screen, is the open spaces are more meaningful because you've been able to push and pull the residential parts to allow for those more meaningful arrangements of open space areas. And the groupings and the clusterings of smaller little mini neighborhoods within the neighborhood gives you that flexibility.
But we can do that in a PUD now.
Not really. I mean, there might be some examples, but, and again, this may predate the code, it may not predate the code, but we're asking people to give up 15% open space and getting nothing in return for it in the current code. So that's, yeah.
So we change that number.
Well, there's more complexity to that than the product types, and we're going to get into that about, trying to incentivize those, as Ryan's saying. So it is a blend of product types, or could be a blend of product types. It may or may not be a blend, but that example has been shown to be quite successful by those developers that have done it and made it work. So even though you may have different housing types on the same street or across the street, they still work.
And I think, Commissioner Ebert, we get what you're saying. Philosophically, yeah, you could just cherry pick a couple easy development standards to change, but we're trying to do this in a more holistic way. So we're looking at it and changing our code. I think part of the problem is our code's always just been like incrementally a little changed here and there, and no one's ever looked at these things in a holistic way. And so, yeah, it is taking a long time and it's complicated, but the goal is to reimagine the code to actually be more thoughtful about how these things are implemented.
I think part of the issue,
And I get what you're, let me turn myself on. I get what you're saying too. I hear what you're saying. I just feel like we already have a mechanism. We've already done it in the past. I just don't know why we're spending so much time and money on it now to make it different.
I think part of it is, I would argue that the situation is that those examples are very few when you look at the whole of the city. So, and this is,
Okay.
as a comparison, we see very few PUDs. I've not seen any since I've worked here. So no one has done a PUD.
And that is why.
Well, because I think it's challenging. I think the current code is not working to incentivize that, to make.
I would beg to argue that
Yeah,
it's because the market, that's not a saleable product. As far as the PUD is concerned, doesn't have anything to do with our code. It's just that the developers that are coming in and building are saying, you know what? I can sell $800,000 single-family houses on those lots, and that's what they're doing. Now, if they could come in and do something like this and make money on it, they'd do that too. And we have the option for that in our code.
I would disagree, though, that, I don't think it is incentivized. And I would say that to your point, I think there probably is a market for the higher end homes. I don't disagree with that. But I also feel like we've not done a service here on our code to address it, to allow for it to happen and to give it the most incentive it possibly can. Would you rather have a planned community that's built out with integrated housing, or something that's like where products, and there's good and bad products out there, and not to pick and choose, but would you rather have something that's planned, master planned, or would you have something that's like not master planned? I guess in the end, that's my question for the Planning Commission.
I think sometimes too, it's a little bit about certainty, right? If there are some opportunities in the code to provide some clarity about what product types and what incentives may not be the right word, but maybe what levers or standards are flexible, it gives more certainty, and there might be a developer that it feels better about coming to the community and saying, we'd like to do this product type. When it's a, not clear and objective or is, open for interpretation, that can create some challenge, and they might go to a site that does have certainty before investing in a site that does not.
To that point, I think it was Mark's place out there where they wanted to alternate lot sizes, and so every other lot size was going to be below a standard by, 50 square feet or something like that. And we spent so long beating it around the panel here over what was a fairly simple concept, and I think the point being is that by passing some rules, making it so that you could could go through all of this with guidelines codified. You don't have to make your case to the council or to the commission to try and convince them of something that was, they were just trying to provide some variety of product. But we kept trying to catch them out on trying to be nefarious about something. And they're like, no, we're trying to be marketable. We're not trying to sneak something under, because every other lot was, you know, one lot gave up a few feet and the next one picked up some, and that allowed them to do some alternating designs, and it made the properties look more, you know, the neighborhood look more palatable.
Did they get it done?
That's what they asked for, and we gave them the ability to do it. Whether they
Yes,
ever built it or
they
not.
have actually. They started on that piece first. I mean, there's multiple phases because the market's changed, but they're building out their product there. I would also say that there may be some examples that you know of that you're like, yeah, that's really cool. The open space is great. There are some examples in this community where it's not necessarily what I would call usable open space that are PUDs. So again, it's a mixed bag out there, and I think the code can always be helped by refinement. And because we're doing this as part of a need, because of the housing need piece, and also it's required to do these as part of our efficiency measures for our urban growth boundary, therefore, that's why we're doing this. Yeah.
I'm not going to discuss this anymore.
Okay.
I personally think we can do what we need to do with PUDs and B3. That's just my take. And then we could just move on. But
Can I throw an idea that's completely unrelated out there? So when I look at housing and all the different types, if it's smaller, if it's larger, whatever, something that we don't really have is accessible housing. People who are aging, people who have physical disabilities. Could we perhaps consider that if you are building a product, whatever product type, where you have you have a bedroom and bath like on the main floor, a master bedroom and bath on the main floor as part of the design structure, like easy access, you know, from parking to the place, that there's some kind of little like tantalizing bonus for you that you can do more with the density or whatever. Because we need more housing like that. There's so many people who don't have the housing they need just to like get into their house and get into their bedroom and get around, or like you're older and you're stuck in this house because financially you can't move. Well, great, maybe you already have a setup that you can stay in your home on the main level. You get hurt, now you can't climb up the stairs. Well, great, you've got an option. I think most of these products that we've seen, like even some of the kind of townhomey complex, the over on Township that we just approved recently, the one that I didn't like, the green space being open enough, they had 3 bedrooms. Like, why not figure out how to have one on the ground floor? It's just something that I've seen over and over again with anything from rentals to ownership, that most houses don't accommodate that as an option. But it's a really important thing for just the overall population of humanity that we could maybe do something a little more on.
That's actually why a lot of cities pursue cottage cluster ordinances, because that particular product type does lend itself to having a smaller one-story unit. I think the ones we are talking about tonight, I don't know if they had any one-story ones, but they're definitely examples of cottage clusters that
It doesn't have to be
yeah.
one story entirely,
Yeah.
just that if it's a 2-story or 3-story even, just that the main level has a bedroom and a full bath on it.
Gotcha, yeah.
Because then it doesn't matter if you've got 2 or 3 stories. If your circumstances change, you could still live in that house. But somebody else on the second or third floor, whatever. It just gives some flexibility that most housing doesn't have, and it seems like a fairly simple thing.
So I was going to say, this Reed's Crossing PUD, it's in the South Hillsborough Plan District, and they actually have just exactly that. So in the South Hillsborough Plan District, you get essentially a density bonus if you create one-story houses. And so if you ever have a chance and go drive through this area, there are tons of one-story houses. These developers get density bonuses, so.
They always put like
That-
the 3-story buildings on the
That
periphery.
wouldn't necessarily specifically address ADA, it's just more of the fact they're
Right, I mean,
one
that's-
story.
yeah,
The
it's more
ADA
building
needs are
code.
usually going to be more customer-driven,
Right.
augmentations made. It's not necessarily a product line that a municipality is going to try to justify or enforce in its design. We're just talking about product style, land size,
Right.
lot
I
size.
think the intent, though, is they acknowledge
Sure.
there's desire for more single-story homes that allow people to kind of age in place.
Yeah.
And Hillsborough offers that incentive to developers, like you build X of these, you get X more units that you can, have in your development.
And I would propose that it could be kind of flexible. It doesn't necessarily have to be, this is actually ADA 100% compliant, but it's like, there's a bedroom and a bath on the main floor, and it's fairly easy to get into. So if you need, it's really, a lot of it's age and place. Yeah, okay, I'll quit talking about it then.
Opportunity for.
Opportunities
Yeah.
I know what you're headed to, I get it.
All right. Shall we proceed?
Okay.
All right.
Just closing out this particular project example, go ahead, Dawn, if you, or whoever's. There we go. These are just a couple of images of the different product types that are present in Reed's Crossing. And so looking at the different units, I mean, I think that triplex is a great example, that second one in. If it weren't for the sidewalk connections, it'd be hard to see that there are 3 units there, right? And so this opportunity to see some cohesiveness amongst the design as part of the PUD. Oftentimes these developments might have development standards independent, right? Homeowners associations or overall design review boards that are internal to the development are really trying to promote that cohesive look at the project overall. And so you see this variety in housing, but it looks and feels connected. So just some imagery there to close us out. And then our next one is Austin Heritage PUD. So similar to the one we just covered, we see a mix of product types and lot sizes in this particular development. There is extensive open space. They have a clubhouse and a pool even. So taking a heavy focus on bringing in those amenities for their residents. This development has a combination of both alley-loaded and front-loaded homes, which really creates kind of a neat opportunity for almost like, street presence and placemaking as you're walking along those streets and you're not being interrupted by a bunch of cars going into driveways. It creates kind of a nice look and feel. This picture here on the far right is actually in the foreground is a single-family detached home that's alley-loaded, and it is right up against a whole street of townhomes that are alley loaded as well. So they're facing one another. And, to me, I think there's always been a little bit of a stigma about townhomes versus single family detached. It's just kind of a broad idea that people have that they can't be compatible. And to me, this is a great example of how that can work together and not look out of place. And planned unit developments typically offer that because it's in their best interest for this to all work together. And that's that master planning that's really coming to the forefront and creating an opportunity for the community and the city to benefit from this concept. And so good example of how they made that work. Moving to the next slide, I don't want to belabor the comments we had earlier, so I'm actually using this example to talk more about how density is spread out across the site. And so I believe you might have seen one of these in your memo, but we added another here. So on the right is just showing you how the product types are spread out across the development. So you can see single family on the periphery there, and it's very contextually appropriate, right? Because it's butting up against those existing single-family detached product types that have been there for whoever knows how long, but like for like butting up against one another to make that buffer before you get to the more dense product types at the center of the site, where you start to see the narrower single family and then the townhouse and then some of those duplexes. So creating that kind of insulation. I thought it was interesting to look at the zoning as well. So we talked a little bit at the beginning, and one of the things that we're talking about for the code updates for Canby is this idea that you may have a planned unit development that has a mix of base zones. And really the idea is to acknowledge and understand what the total density is of that overall site, but to allow for the movement of those product types internal to the development, because there may be this opportunity where you want to insulate those at the center, like those townhomes. But in this example, only half of those townhomes are in that R18, that higher density zone. But the recognition is that there's benefit to, shifting where that sits in the site to address the context of where this is going and letting those single-family detached be on the periphery and insulating that higher density. And so PUD's giving us the ability to blend that across the site is a feature that can work really well and ultimately be beneficial for the neighborhoods as these developments come in and we infill. So again, just another example of something where we're looking to maybe make more clear in Canby's code what could happen in a mixed zone scenario. So.
And I think not exactly what's going on there, because that's a little bit more of a real residential neighborhood, but sort of an example of that is Hope Village. And to me, it's similar, because if you could go back a slide, this is actually sort of what Hope Village's underlying zoning looks like. And so that's kind of what Hope Village did back in the day. I've looked at all the Hope Village background documentation. I don't think we could approve it like it is today because our PUD is not, our ordinance isn't robust enough. So it would be memorializing that overall concept. Because if you go in Hope Village, there is a combination. There's the duplexes, they have the memory care center, they have sort of an in-between, and then they have more stuff coming later. But it's the idea that those things are all kind of planned together to work together rather than these very isolated, independent blobs of different residential densities. So for what it's worth.
So I understand the concept of and the reasoning behind kind of combining all of the different zoning together to get kind of a blended density that's allowable. But we've had discussions before where commission members have expressed concerns about the zoning that's existing and people's kind of like ownership property rights to continue to keep them like that or to sell them like that. So does that, you've got a furrow brow. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think there's an option. There always will be an option to do traditional developments. We are not precluding that.
Oh,
So
no.
this-
And
yeah.
I didn't think that you were, but I guess I don't fully understand. If somebody had a planned unit development, would it have to be on completely undeveloped land?
That's a great question. I think the majority of those, I believe, in Canby would be on land that was not developed. I mean, it's going to take a lot of more challenges if it's something that already has pre-development on it, but there could be redevelopment as well. But I'm guessing that you're dealing with more greenfield situations, or there might be a few houses that get relocated, or they might get demolished in that process. But I think largely you're dealing with large enough acreage that you're probably going to need that to be unconstrained.
Gotcha. So in that instance, really, if a developer wanted to do something, they would already have or be obtaining the ownership rights to that land and then just go from there to say, hey, I've got a PUD idea and I want to be able to reconfigure the density based on the different zones.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding the question right, the PUD code and the regulations don't come into effect or applicable at all until you submit a
Yep.
land use application that says, I have this
I
land.
have
and
it
wanna
all.
go
This is
through
what
a
I'm doing.
PUD."
Yep.
So
Okay, thank you.
absent that land use approval, there's no change in what that underlying zoning is.
Yeah, nothing would happen unless it is just
Right.
owned in whole and then they're moving forward with it. Appreciate that, thank you.
If there are other questions, otherwise we're going to move into the final segment here. So we're going to get into commercial mixed use. We're obviously showing a picture of the Dahlia, and maybe just the premise here is we're focusing on the south side of 99E. And this is on the north side of 99E. We are not intending to change anything on the north side of 99E.
Can I ask why not?
I think that this seems like it's working pretty well, and that's the downtown core, and I think that's really what the vision was for the city, would be to have more of these kind of developments. There's a vacant property next to the library. That seems like it could be something similar to what we see at the Dahlia, in my vision of what,
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking about like if you're on 3rd North there's a mixture of old homes and maybe some commercial. And I know some of those folks, and they'd like to develop those old properties. They're in this core, but they're on Third, but they can't because the C1 restrictions, this isn't quite right, but they'd have to build a square bank building with 80% windows. That's their option. So they can't do mixed use. They can't, it's really restricted. And those are like neighborhoods. There's little houses and maybe maybe a planning manager or, like an investment firm or something. But there are a lot of homes on that street on Third and Fourth that to me could make really nice, not a big Dahlia building, but a combination of a business and a property. And those people that are kind of stuck with those properties today, they're the older homes that have been there forever, but they can't, they're having a hard time redeveloping them at all because of the requirements to make them like a bank. So I was just curious why that area, because it's a perfect neighborhood for that, because you can walk to the store, you can walk to the library, you don't cross 99. I just thought, anyway, I was just curious about that area.
Commissioner Giroux, excellent points on all those. How broadly we go into other code changes, and you're going to see this in the housing production strategies about other code changes that we're intending to do. There are some challenges I would not disagree with, and this is part of what we're getting into on the south side of 99, is that currently you have to have vertical mixed use and the downstairs floor has to be commercial. That doesn't make sense to us as staff, that be the situation, and that horizontal detached residential would be more appropriate, and allowing that just period, because it's not even allowed because of the design overlay on both sides of the highway. To your point, it may very well be another deeper dive on Third and Fourth that you mentioned as other parts of other code amendments, and this portfolio, so to speak, of housing production strategies that we have. We've touched on these previously, but they're going to get into things like, they're pretty broad in their nature, but I could see that what you're talking about could fit within those about other code changes that we would do over the next 8 years. That's another piece that the state requires us to do is, so in addition to these three, there's other production strategies that talk about making things, tweaks to your codes to make things as affordable and as much variety as possible. So everything you said is something that would be important to maybe dive into later in more detail. We're simply trying to address hopefully more low-hanging fruit, so to speak, without, I think that might take a little more deeper dive on some of these, but the glazing and the downstairs commercial, super challenging, at least on the south side, and probably is in those streets too, to the folks that you know.
So there aren't any economies of scale by doing both at the same time, north and south?
Yeah, and I think part of it is we were not intending to necessarily open the box of the whole design ordinance. I mean, that was never our intention, but more like near term on 99, there'd be some synergies between the downtown and across the 99. And over time, we are already starting to see very strong interest in food carts that would be in proximity to walking. There's some cool stuff happening downtown, and overall the gateways and corridors change over time, and that is a gateway. I know right now people are not seeing that, but in 20 years that could look completely differently, and just providing again another toolbox, not to say someone's going to put residential in there, but the primary purpose, I guess the differentiator on 99E on the south side is the primary purpose of that would still remain commercial. You'd have to have a commercial activity on that same lot. And if you had extra room, you could put residential next door to it, but it would not have to be integrated into the same building with the glazing on the bottom and all the bells and whistles that you see at the Dahlia. That's the ultimate example of what the downtown design standards are really, for that area, really showing.
So does that mean there might be an opportunity in the next 8 years to change some of that C1 to allow that?
I think it would be changing the code itself, not removing the zoning, but changing the code to allow them more flexibility
Okay.
with that. That would be my thought, on that, Brian.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, I know exactly what Commissioner Droscher is talking about, and I think we should flag it as something that we could look into for our next batch of housing efficiency measures. I think that would be a good idea.
Thank you.
So with that, I mean, it kind of gives the context, and so we're going to dive right in. And we have a number of questions for you all. I mean, part of this, again, is this is the area we put around the red boundary around it. It does include C2 and some CM zone properties. It's kind of a barbell, and the weights of the barbell, so to speak, would be the CM, and the rest of the thin handle would be more of the C2. And again, this is really not differentiating the treatment other than for horizontal housing, which would be detached and given that, the parameters around that, and that again, trying to provide another form of housing. This would likely be in the form of attached product. It would not be detached. These would be more like apartments that we'd be talking about. I'm not going to take you guys' thunder, so if you guys want to, I'm sorry, I'm just sort of launching into this. So I'm going to let Jessica and Matt start to go back into it.
Appreciate it. No, that was a great summary. It's a great summary of how we got here, and just wanted to refresh everybody on the zoning. The next slide does give us a little more context. I think last time we spoke, we were talking really closely on the C2, but wanted to, maybe the next slide.
Yep.
Wanted to just introduce the fact that we do have that downtown Canby overlay that does overlap this. And so, we talked a lot about what we should change in C2, but took a step back and decided we wanted to talk a little more about what the DCO actually allows for in this area of influence, or this target area that we're looking at south of 99E. So that is what we shared in the packet, was looking at some of those metrics and some of those design standards that we think should be, should be looked at and perhaps modified here to allow for that horizontal mix to be a little more palatable. So again.
Jessica?
Yes.
Can we interrupt real quick? Sorry.
Oh, yes.
Now, I had a question on the previous slide.
Sure.
So this is really specific, but on Second Street, isn't there some R1 there on the south side? It says R2, but isn't there R1 there
No, I think it's all R2.
on your street? Okay, sorry. Okay, that's it.
Okay. So I think we can jump to the next slide and jump right into
I
the
have this
code.
question on this one.
Oh, sure.
So what's the difference between transitional commercial and core commercial?
So there are definitely different metrics as you go through the DCO. We do not have any land that's in that transitional commercial, so we are not focused on that for the conversation tonight. But there
Meaning
are
this doesn't apply to us?
I'm sorry?
This doesn't apply to us, is that what you're saying?
Yes, there's no
Okay.
transitional commercial on the south side of 99E. It's just core commercial and outer highway commercial.
What's the difference between the two?
The area on the map, and then you'll see metrics. So
No,
as
the
you- so-
definition, the definition.
Oh.
Well,
What's the
there's
difference between-
different development standards in our existing code called out for those areas. So setbacks and densities and things like that apply to the existing zoning in those areas.
Okay. Thank you.
And the light pink ones, the transitional ones, I think are some of the areas that you were talking about that are C1, but they're kind of peripheral to the downtown area. No?
But what does that mean?
So for example,
Sorry, it just stuck
no,
in
no,
my
no, these are good questions. So in the core commercial, the deepest red in our existing code, that's where the most kind of like aggressively urban development standards are. So the buildings have to be most pushed up to the street and have the most glazing.
Okay.
And have the least, like parking and things like that in the front. And so the overlay zone chapter of our code that we have now separates the overlay into these sub areas that have slightly different development standards.
So this does apply to us then? There is a transitional commercial and a core commercial in our city?
Right. I think what Jessica's saying is for this efficiency measure, the red, the like primary color red outline is the area that's being contemplated for this efficiency measure, which is only on the south side of the
Okay.
highway. So it kind of cuts across a couple of those sub areas.
Okay, thank you.
So if you
Next
wanna-
slide.
Oh, go ahead, Dawn.
Are you, next slide?
Yeah, I think the next slide will be
Okay.
helpful because you'll see how they break out. So the metrics and the design standards are similar for all of the different sub-areas, but they have different metrics associated with them. So to Ryan's point about the core being most intense, you can see here that it's got the least amount of setback requirements, whereas that OHC sub-area, as you get to the perimeter, it actually allows it to be further separated. So it's just these kind of modifications and slow kind of beveling of the intensity of the zoning as you move outwards from the core. So these are the current standards as they are written in your code. And I've flagged the 2 areas that are specific in our target area south of 99E. We only have CC sub-area and OHC sub-area. And so these are the current standards. I know there was a lot of talk last time about what that setback along the front should be. And we wanted to come back and talk a little bit about what it actually is, because C2 does have a standard, but the OHC actually supersedes that. So there is already this opportunity for a smaller front yard setback, and in fact, an obligation to build to that. And so wanted to bring that up. And then I think we'll get through what the code says, and then we'll talk about what maybe it should be, if that works for everybody.
And so an example of that is, so in this picture, I think is it Lone Elder Pizza that's right there? So they're in that, even though they're on the south side, they're in that core sub area in our existing code, and that's why they're super close to the street. And then when you get farther down to like McDonald's, they're in the outer highway commercial sub area, and then that's when the buildings start to get farther away generally from the highway.
Okay. Okay. This next metric deals with where the building facade is relative to the setbacks. So there is a graphic in the code, but it's a little bit complicated, so I'm going to just describe it with an example. So if you've got a property that's got 100 feet of lineal frontage along Highway 99E, if you're in that CC zone, 60 feet of your building frontage needs to be built at that minimum setback. So 60 feet has to be at 0. The rest of it can be at 8 feet, because I think 10 is the maximum, right? So there's that expectation that you build a certain amount of that building at that minimum setback. Conversely, with that OHC, it reduces the amount of that building that has to sit at that minimum setback. And then in addition to that reduction, it actually has a setback of 10 feet. So you're just needing 40 feet of your building to be at 10 feet from the property line. So again, these are existing standards that we have in place for the DCO. But as we think about a potential scenario where you have horizontal mixed use, the question comes up, do we really want that residential building right at the property line? And if we don't want it, then we need to be looking at ways we modify this standard to allow for them to do something different. So that's really the exercise today, and seeing what the code is saying has to happen, and then recognizing, or deciding where in a horizontal mixed use scenario, we might want to modify what this says to get the end product that the commission and the city wants.
Before we jump into that, just because I want to make sure I've got this clear. So with the CC sub area, it's saying that 60% needs to be at 0,
Yes.
the minimum. But the OHC supersedes that, and it only needs to be 40%?
No, the OHC is a different sub-area in your DCO. So when you're on that outer edge, you get to be
Yep.
40% of your building at
Right
the
there.
10 feet. It's all about where you sit in
Yep.
that map.
Gotcha. Okay.
So what you're proposing is that we standardize.
I think what we're asking is for feedback about what we think might make sense if we are looking at a residential only building scenario, right? The idea of horizontal mixed use is that you would allow for a residential only building, which means residential would be on that first floor. And so the question really becomes, do these standards make sense in that scenario? And if they don't, what would we like to see?
It would be, what you're saying is it would be a value building with residential on the bottom floor also.
Yes, absolutely. And then in that situation, does it make sense for it to sit right at the property line? And if it doesn't, what does make sense? And I think this is more of a conversation, because we really didn't get to tease this out too much last time. So this is meant to be a head scratcher and then just a dialogue about what seems reasonable here.
Do we have any ability to have a conversation about the CC sub area being 60% now? Because just in terms of traffic safety and people being able to get in and out of any businesses that are there in that stretch of 99, there are a lot of vision limitations. It's pretty much you are in a parking lot, you are in the way of the sidewalk, or you are on 99. And I'm concerned about making that even more dense, even more buildings right up to the sidewalk. I don't personally see how that would be beneficial to encourage everything being right up on 99, because it's already relatively narrow in the grand scheme of things. And I also have concerns about, as population increases, traffic increases, we still don't know what's going to happen with 205 and if they're ever going to get around to tolling it or not. And if they do, there will definitely be a huge influx of people taking 99 on a daily basis.
So you would be in favor of further setbacks for,
Further setbacks, even for commercial, not just for residential.
Sure.
I just think having that zero setback is a concern,
Okay.
just in general.
Roger that.
What's the point for the zero setback? Is it just wise use of square footage, or?
Window shopping.
I think it's a nod to, philosophically, it's a nod that you're closer to your downtown, and so you're getting more urban as you get closer to downtown is part of it. And as you move away, it's more suburbanized. I guess the planners, and this is a conversation that we have in every community, and, you know, so I realize it's an unpopular opinion, but the planner's counterpoint to, I think, some of the comments is the wider you make streets, the wider you make setbacks, the wider you make intersections, the more you suburbanize the road infrastructure, the faster people go. And that's its own safety problem, is creating a major roadway that already has a lot of traffic through your downtown, and you're incentivizing people, more traffic to go faster. It has its own safety impacts. Think if you live on one side of downtown and you are on one side of town and you work on the other, and crossing over 99, the more you suburbanize it and more spread everything out, the more that's a unfriendly, more car-dependent environment that you're walking through.
So would ODOT have some say over what we say about impacts, since that's not our road?
I
Like
would
about
argue that your
setbacks?
building is not in their roadways. So I think if they have a right-of-way width and a certain standard for what their road should be, you have the right as the community to build up to it, or to, I
Okay.
guess, describe and define what development metrics you hold outside of the right-of-way. I think one of the other things, to Ryan's point, is as you see some of these communities turn to be more pedestrian focused, you start to see a doing away with access points, right? A bunch of access points create that conflict. And so there's this opportunity as development and downtowns evolve over time, that you might see those access points get consolidated elsewhere off of that main street. And I'm not saying that will happen for every site or that it happens overnight, but I think the reality is that if you want to see that transition over time, you have to set that expectation as redevelopment.
But if you look at the existing structure around there, Second, Third, Elm, Grant, those are relatively narrow streets. Second and Third in particular are incredibly narrow streets that have cars parking on both sides now. And if you're adding in more people and more cars, then it's going to be that much more dangerous. Like, you cannot have two cars going in the opposite
Right,
direction.
or you
on those
make it one
roads.
way.
Or you make them one way,
Right.
which
So,
generally
but
cities
correct me
don't
if I'm
want to.
wrong, Don, didn't ODOT jam up the former Dairy Queen location that's being reconstructed?
Chipotle.
Yeah. And didn't they have some say in what they were doing on that piece of
They
property?
did on the driveway access. One of them, which was a two-way, is becoming a one-way because it's just too
Okay.
narrow. And just maybe a few other observation points from Jessica and Ryan. I think I like what Jessica said over time. I mean, part of this is we were not intending to blow the lid off of this and do a gateway and corridor master plan study. This is the beginning of this dialogue, and we're trying to focus down, although the points are well taken on commercial, but trying to look more at the residential side of things and just additive, like a small additive piece there. My vision is that by doing this small additive piece, and hopefully we can get to consensus on this, that this will give us the ability to fund, to go after funds for grants through ODOT. Right now, we really can't do much of anything, and I think the part that Jessica's talking about, I mean, I'm not necessarily saying we're going to do this overnight either, but you do start to look at access restrictions, and part of it is not every business has to have its front door off of 99 either. You can see the side door here on O'Reilly's here. I mean, there's orientation issues, and I get that, but there's also, to Ryan's point, the sense of enclosure that most communities where you have a downtown, there is that sense of enclosure, and there's a pedestrian component to that. There's also just that's just how a lot of cities are done. As the older cities in particular, a lot of the buildings go right up to the sidewalk. 99's a tricky thing because we don't really control, we didn't control the design of that, but could it be made better? I think it could be. I think I'm not seeing us going through and changing the standards and necessarily making them greater than they are in the downtown design overlay. This is a huge undertaking to blow the lid off of this thing, and I probably would end up dropping this as an efficiency measure if we did that, because we don't have enough time to do that. It would probably take a year to do that. So I think that by planting the seed and going through and doing maybe like something that we can all agree to on the multifamily aspect of it might give us the leverage to go after some grants and then do more corridor studies about what should this look like and the design elements related to those. That's part of the vision. That's not really what we're talking about tonight, but that's part of where I hope we will end up going.
Well, to that end, that's why I asked the question about what ODOT's influence is on this, right? Because they did have a say on part of the development
Well,
on one thing.
and they do. And to your point,
Right.
transportation growth management grants are a huge form of funding. We're going to go after one for concept planning for the urban growth boundary expansion area, because you got to do concept planning after you do the initiation before it comes back into your comp plan. And we're going after that one in July. Transportation growth management plans are all about that, and ODOT is a huge proponent of bringing buildings closer to streets. You look at Hillsborough and Oronco Station. I had involvement in Springfield. We did a project called Jasper Natron, and it was the same thing. And so really it is about that, you would think that ODOT would want the widest street possible and no buildings next to it. That's not what the program's about. It's a planning and transportation exercise, and there are values in bringing buildings closer to streets. They still have to be planned out and safe, and there are ways of doing that. Part of this is all the 99s were, they were the old highways. There was no I-5. And so they've kind of lived their life to some degree, and there's going to be redevelopment happening to some degree along this corridor. It's just the reality. People will consolidate lots. Buildings will be removed. And so we're just trying to, again, add another layer here to allow for, if somebody wanted to do something creative, they could do it. And then maybe, we could start to readdress the other elements over time that, that are being brought up tonight about commercial.
So to Jessica's point, you were asking for input on what we thought on setbacks in these areas, right?
Yes, we do have one more design consideration that I was hoping we'd be able to cover as well, but I think if you guys have ideas on these two that we've covered so far, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the question on ODOT was just to help inform what the hell we're going to say.
I'm sorry. I went into the deep end of the pool on that.
That's all right.
But
Yeah.
it felt like it was important. Yeah.
I think that one of the things, to what you said, Matt, the ODOT is definitely going to either allow or not allow ingress and egress off of 99E. I mean, they're just, look at Walnut Street bypass. I mean, they're here, but they have historically, if the bowling alley hadn't already been where O'Reilly is now, there would have only been one access, and that developer really had to fight to keep both of those accesses there, because ODOT did not want both of those accesses there. And that just goes on down the road. I think the real question that we need to be asking is what are we going to do, like we talked about before, what are we going to be doing about 2nd Street? If we put a Dahlia on 99E here, no matter what the setback is, how they're going to get in and out of that building. And we're going to have to take some real strong looks at what we do with second, whether they're one-ways or whether we take away the street parking. Because, you know, we were just in the meeting the other night, and we were talking about transportation. And we've got to figure out how to make our transportation better with the streets we've got. And we're not going to change 99E. That is, what you're seeing right here, the change that's happening right now is all the change that's going to happen in the next probably 40, 50 years. So we're going to have to live with what's going on right there right now. Ingress and egress on there, it's just not going to happen. It's really not.
I have a question.
They'll take it away, they're not going to give us any more. So I think whether we have, you know, setbacks, fine, I think we could develop it fine, but what we really need to look at is what's going to happen on Second Street and how we function as a city and getting around here.
It's still designated as a truck route.
What's that?
Second is still designated as a truck route, which is its own
Separate
kind of.
topic. I have a question. So do we have any sense of what the walkability score in this area is now and what we might be trying to achieve? Is there any, do we look at that at all?
I'm not sure, Commissioner Jaros, if there is a standard. We could ask DKS. I don't have that. I mean, obviously, in that summit, we talked about risk, you know, not walkability, which is that's a little different aspect. But it's a great question, and I mean, those are the kinds of things that, like, maybe there is a wider sidewalk, maybe the building still comes up to, I mean, like, visually, where are we going with this whole exercise? I think is part of maybe that discussion, but I'd be happy to report back if there is a metric on walkability for that. But I do think that Commissioner Ewart as well, I think, you know, as accesses are consolidated, et cetera, it may end up becoming a better, I mean, back in the day, nobody cared. There was no traffic control whatsoever on 99. People just drove. I mean, it's surprising that people didn't get hit more. But I mean, yeah.
At your own risk.
No, but I mean, it was kind of like buyer beware. I mean, you got in and you just drove. I mean, it was, you know, we didn't have all these restrictions. So, and now with our traffic volumes increasing, you know, I think it's an important element. But I would be happy to report back to your question.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question to Commissioner Dros? The Ace Glass building on the corner, is there a historical overlay to that?
No,
No? Okay.
no. Good question.
So does the question still stand? You're looking for this body to make a recommendation for
Yeah,
a
so-
setback?
Yeah,
Okay,
so I think
double check.
we're discussing three metrics in the DCO that we think might be challenging for ground floor residential if we allow for that horizontal mixed use, which is the goal tonight, to talk about how we would allow for horizontal mixed use to happen in our target area in that red outline. So the first issue is general setbacks, and are we comfortable with what they are? This next one is the percent of the building that is up at that setback that is required. If somebody were to bring a permit before us today, they would need to show this, and if it was for residential use on that ground floor, is that compatible? And then the last metric that we'll be looking at is the glazing, and I think we might have alluded to that a little bit, but here's a quick kind of snapshot. Again, we're focusing only on those two overlays or two areas in DCO that are in our target area, so just OHC and CC. But you'll notice that there's different window coverage requirements based on what facade we're talking about. If it's up against 99E, if it's on secondary streets, which almost all the others are secondary streets. I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget, but they're elm, grant, ivy, juniper, knot, and locust. So having that secondary measure, and then alleys have a different percentage. So thinking about a horizontal, a horizontal residential building or horizontal mixed use where that residential is on the first floor, in the core of this, that CC area, do we really want 60% of a residential building to have to have glazing? That's not going to create the kind of privacy that you'd want if you were living on that ground floor unit. And so if we're opening up this opportunity for horizontal mixed use, it seems worthwhile to ask about the legitimacy of these particular design standards.
Is there, or do you have in the portfolio or the dossier anywhere what a 20%, what a 30%, what a 40% would look like per a drawing like this?
We do not. This is taken from your code, so we did not create any new diagrams at
Right.
this time. I think, technically diagrams are in our scope to do for the cottages in particular, but I think, to your point, they are nice to have those images to understand what it really means to take that percentage, but we do not have them at this point.
Because I could say 40-foot setback with 20% rules, but that could look terrible. I don't know.
That's fair. Don, I don't know if you.
It's a great question. We were actually talking about this before the work session tonight. I think our sense is 35 to 40% would be reasonable for a ground floor for a house, for a horizontal use, but not 60. 50 seems a lot. That's a lot more than you normally see in a house. Like any kind of multifamily, you just don't see that unless there's commercial on downstairs, floor. You just don't see that. There's windows, but they're not generally the whole. There's security. It's not just privacy, but there's security. There's all kinds of issues that you've got with glass, like on the first floor. It's just not very common. It's usually raised, and so it's not like it's like usually at the more, I think, chest level, head level, or maybe higher there.
Well, I think that when we did this back in the day, there was no concept of having residential on the ground floor.
Absolutely.
That wasn't even
Yep, agreed.
that wasn't even a thought.
Had a heck of a time getting past that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reason why we have zones. The whole reason why they were created in the first place is to separate the commercial from the residential so that one isn't running over the other. And here we are, just kind of blowing a hole in the whole thing. And it's like, I can't help but feel we're missing the point.
Yeah, to me, it seems weird that it's the downtown on the other side of this massive road. I mean, I know we want to kind of, make it so that people can get from the south side to the north side, but I don't consider what's happening in the area right over here at the Dahlia and Cutsforth and everything to be the same kind of situation as literally feet off of 99. It doesn't feel the same. It doesn't seem like we would want to do it the same way.
I agree. I just, would I want to live in a building that's on 99, facing it on the downstairs floor? I don't think so. I don't even think I'd want to live on the fourth floor. The Dahlia building that's really not relevant because it's back on the other side of the tracks. But to put it right there by O'Reilly, let's say, or take the place of Ace Glass, that older building, I can't imagine it, but that would be even a saleable thing.
But nevertheless, it exists. I mean, if you head up and down North Interstate, that's all you see, guys. And I was there. They had to move the power poles. We did all the plumbing for it. It was mixed use, mid-rise. Now, in that case, it was truly mixed use, meaning commercial down below, apartments above. But I saw on the other side of Interstate, they had them all the way down. And Interstate is busy as all hell. Plus you have the Max running right up and down there. So I hear you. I wouldn't either, but I'm just saying, I'm seeing it.
But part of the justification for
pedestrian
interstate
safety.
being built up that way is because there's mass transit there.
Yeah.
We don't have mass transit, and we're not going to see it in the next 40 years.
That is a different fish, there's no doubt about that. I guess going to,
It's all about cars, and it's all about, one of the things about pedestrians, about urban design is pedestrian safety, and you don't shove the pedestrians right up against traffic going 35 miles an hour. You just don't. And, if you want to have a little informal trip, just go around and look at all the busted up car parts that's sitting in the dirt around the major intersections along 99. There's physical evidence of impacts in the last. The glass building, how many
Gets
times
run
has
into
that thing been
regularly,
hit?
frankly.
That thing gets hit all the time, and I don't see how tightening up, I would like to get pedestrians off of 99, actually, if I could figure out a way to do it, you know? I just don't
Right.
see a way, with the way that traffic is designed by the state, how it can be a comfortable place for anyone.
And specific to Ivy, I know that ODOT really wants to be able to have more space on those turns because semis can't turn off of 99 and onto Ivy, or really any direction off of 99 and Ivy. But they can't get the land access because the glass building is still there. But at some point, it wouldn't be, and then they're going to have to widen that whole intersection because Ivy is really regarded as a major street as well, not just kind of like a collector street like some of the others you mentioned earlier.
So I think there's a whole nother discussion as to whether we actually want residential on 99E.
You were talking main floor residential vice, mixed use.
Dahlia?
Yeah, I mean, and it's part of the conversation. I think, obviously, the current code has not incentivized any residential, and I don't think it will. So I just don't think that dynamic is going to exist where you're going to have the same Dahlia experience or construction on the south side of 99. I don't think that, I mean, you might see that, 40 years from now, but you're not going to see that. I mean, that's a long ways from now. I think the north side is different. It's where the core of the area is. It's very walkable, and it's just a different experience. So that was really the premise, because right now, currently, we are allowing that, but essentially, the downstairs has to be almost 100% commercial. So and then it has to be an integrated building, which means you're talking scrape and rebuild. You're not talking about an ancillary add to a vacant lot or partially vacant lot. So that the incentive there is to give somebody the ability as an owner, the ability to have some usability of their property that they may not have otherwise thought about in terms of that use. Because if we leave it the same as it is now, I doubt that unless people really want to scrape and rebuild, I don't think the market is that high that you're going to end up seeing people tear everything down and rebuild when they have a perfectly viable structure there. And so this would be an additive to that. There would still be the majority of the business that would have to be commercial. It would have to be a commercial business on that same lot. So it's really an ancillary add here. I get the safety issues, but if that is the consensus, I mean, that there should be no residential on 99, then we'll take that back, so.
Perhaps there's an opportunity to, I suppose, to, be more strategic about where you allow those residential-only buildings. So you've got lots of properties that have frontage along 99E, but if they have frontage along Second or, south of there, is that an opportunity where that building might feel a little less out of place? And so I think that's part of our discussion as well, because as the DCO's laid out, it recognizes secondary streets are different than 99E. And so perhaps this discussion becomes about those buildings, these residential-only buildings being off of 99E and oriented towards those secondary streets. And if we did that, what does that window coverage percentage look like? And what does that distance from setback look like? And if you like that idea at all, but I think the code is set up in a way to be supportive of kind of carving it out in that way.
My concern would be that those secondary streets really are not suited to additional homes and density. Because what's the lot, you were saying that Oregon recently lowered the amount of what a piece of property value is that they kind of take it out of consideration that it would ever be redeveloped. It used to be like the strike price, it was like 550, now it's 400 or something like that.
I think it was 461, or I'm just remembering from the study, yeah, it was lowered, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the area that we're talking about, there isn't anything there that's going to be under the strike price.
And I think that's the challenge. We were simply, I get the safety component. We're not trying to encourage like unsafe areas, but we're seeing, things like tons of food carts within walking distance, especially on the south side, and that has not materialized yet. But I think there is going to be a transitional piece, and should there not be some opportunity for someone to do something with their property if they can meet all the other standards? because, I mean, the idea was to never remove the commercial focus, but to just allow some additional additive, given the current, pressures for prices for rents, et cetera. Would there be another way of and maybe it really is not materially as meaningful or will result in maybe as much difference as the PUD and cottage cluster that we're hoping for, but there still could be some additive benefit over time. But I guess the question is, where would you guys feel comfortable with that in terms of what that standard would be? How far from the street would that be? And, maybe that conversation could unfold.
Well, and it's like, are they bedroom windows? Because you got to be able to climb out a bedroom window in a fire, and which means that you got to be able to open them and get out, and then.
What do taller buildings like the Dahlia do for fires? I mean, are those buildings don't have egress in the windows, do they? For a fourth story? So the balcony is considered the egress?
Yeah, typically larger buildings like that they have automatic sprinklers added, which single-family homes usually don't for the most part.
So to your question, I think for just me personally, I would support, of course, the devil's in the details, right? Parking, all that, off-street or secondary street, mixed use. I would support that.
I would be disinclined to until we actually have established safe routes to school for the hundreds of kids who walk down Second and Third to get to the high school. Because right now, it's already a dangerous situation for them. Elm is blind corners everywhere. Grant's a little bit better. Ivy is a busy street that will get busier at some point
Do
as
we
well.
have gaps in sidewalk, or is it just a lot of driveways and so there's conflict points?
A lot of driveways that are conflict points, missing sidewalks in areas, and then visibility with people who are actually on Second, Third, and Elm. And actually turning off a Grant kind of stinks too. So really that whole area between Elm and Ivy, Third and 99 is something that I would like to see us address the safe route to school before we start talking about adding even more cars and housing into it, personally.
And I'm really only opposed to necessarily ground floor residential on 99 proper. I mean, the rest of the barbell, it seems like it would be fine. But it's just 99 is its own animal.
Agreed.
And there's a lot of people that cruise along it that don't care about Canby at all.
Well, and the cars that go off the road.
Yeah.
I just
yeah.
really don't think you should have human beings that close to that big of a road where people can really pick up speed, and we see so many collisions with existing buildings.
Not enough bollards to hide behind.
That'll be a design standard. We'll put ecology blocks all along the
They shall be basalt.
yeah, yes, exactly.
There you
There'll be
go.
bougie
High
ecology
design.
blocks.
High design.
That's right.
I would say for myself, I would see more of the mixed use, but like on that second floor, what's our height restriction on there? There's a height restriction.
I think it's
on there.
45 feet.
45 feet
Yeah,
on 99?
On the commercial, yeah. Is that right?
I believe it is 45, but once you start factoring in parking and all that
Yeah.
stuff, it naturally
Reduces it.
results in lower densities and
But
lower
I
heights.
would see more like doctor's offices, attorneys, dentists, on those things, and egressing out to Second more than on 99, rather than having people, I'm with you. The pedestrians, we're creating an environment there that I don't believe that we want. Nobody strolls down 99.
No,
in the
they go down
evening,
Second or,
to go
the
have
side streets.
pasta or whatever.
Not
Or to
now,
go to
not
a
until
food
the food carts are put in.
Yeah.
Then they will
Even
be
with the food
strolling on
carts, I don't
99.
We need to think about that, don't we? Okay, so I'm just saying, I would for myself, I would probably lean more towards a commercial aspect of where you have attorneys' offices, realtors, that type of thing
That's kinda-
on those other floors, rather than focusing pedestrians right on 99. I think that's kind of a bad idea.
Even if we have food carts, people are getting there with a car in Canby. Like, there aren't going to be that many people who live around that area that are going to choose to walk, because people on the north side aren't going to want to cross 99. People on the south side, either they live close enough to walk or they're driving their car if they don't live like within a 4-block radius. I feel like the culture of Canby at this point in time, you're not going to see people walking. You know, if they live down on 13th, they're not going to take a mile stroll up to 99 to go to the food cart. They are 100% driving those cars.
I think commercial businesses would probably have people walking, but again, that's my thought, but, you know. So I think we have got some direction from you all. You know, it may not be possible to solve all these pieces about, you know, the secondary access piece, but we could contemplate that. The current code allows like 25% on the ground floor maximum for residential. And again, I think we might as well just call it almost virtually all of it, you know, in a vertical situation. I don't know if there'd be any appetite for looking at how that could be possibly increased if it was not like oriented to a street. But again, we'll have to think more about that. These are all good comments. I mean, I think part of it is there's a time and place for everything. This may not be the time and place for this discussion, is what I'm kind of hearing. We're not there yet. So, which is good. I mean, I think this is a part of the discussion. We may end up having an alternative piece that we have to add to our plate to replace this one, however, and I'm not sure what that looks like. So that's a conversation with DLCD. So there may be another housing efficiency measure that you've not seen so far that's part of our housing production strategies that you haven't seen. So.
Cool.
Jessica, Matt, any?
Yeah, I think the next slide was just a summary of those high-level kind of questions we've been talking about, so we can launch over that and move on to kind of the next step slide, which is just a pretty high-level overview of where we're headed. Oh, sorry, before I do that, there was just a couple of examples of what we've got along 99E, just trying to, I guess, give another illustration of where you see some, you know, variation in how much of the building is up against the right-of-way versus a little bit tucked back, and just showing that there is some of this happening along the corridor. And I think to everyone's point, you get on that road and you just kind of drive along and you don't maybe necessarily catch all of these on a daily basis. So just trying to provide that visual to kind of close out our discussion today. But as Don mentioned, I think it was a really good conversation. I appreciate everybody's feedback. And I know we kind of tossed the DCO standards in there at the last minute. So appreciate everybody's patience with us as we walked through those.
Wally's Kitchen has historical significance, doesn't it?
Nostalgia, it's there.
The grease holding those walls up have historical significance.
Just to throw out one thing about these examples, like, part of the reason that they're somewhat workable is because there's a lot of open space around them. So even though they are right up to the road, you have some open area to kind of peek around and see. If we allow or require everything to be right up at that 0 setback, then again, I mean, there's going to be conversations with ODOT for anything that might change or happen with how many access points are allowed. But my concern would be when it's filled in up that front.
Well, and I think just as a general statement, none of this is intended to circumvent traditional safety measures or design review that happens as a result of a land use application, right? Site distance is one of those must-haves no matter what you're doing. So this isn't intended to circumvent or replace that in any sort of fashion. So totally recognize that as a really important and significant piece that you'd have to look at, whether the access is on 99E or second, right? We're going to have that same issue. So can completely appreciate that. And, yeah. I think the last slide is just a quick overview of kind of next steps since we've had our discussion already.
Yeah, and I'll go into those. So we'll be in, I need to figure out, like, with DLCD, like, can we go with this 2 housing efficiency measures, the PUD and cottage clusters, or do we have it to replace this with the 3rd? If we do, you know, that would just be a focused conversation with you all. We're not going to bring up PUD and cottage cluster again. It'd just be whatever the 3rd one was. And we would work session that. So from tonight's conversation, Otherwise, going to council, summer, fall, for work session with council, back to planning commission in the fall for hearing, and then fall, winter for council adoption is the intended timeframe.
Does that act as your items of interest?
I actually have a whole list, but,
What? Oh, God. Let this guy talk.
so,
Go ahead.
we'll close this out. I'll be quick.
That was a great presentation, though. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you both.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you, guys.
really interesting to see the, different ideas and.
So housing production strategies are going to parallel this as well, but, we'll probably be doing something similar on housing efficiency and housing production, probably summer, fall for work session again with the planning commission. And that's kind of following the same pattern for, those two are kind of parallel. Thank you all for attending the community summit, those that did attend community summit number 4. And Matt and Jessica, thank you. Appreciate it. And we had a listening session with the Urban Growth Boundary, those folks that were in the study area, that was on June 11th. So there's another parallel process, obviously, for the expansion. That's continuing. There'll be a community summit number 5, fall, this coming fall, probably late fall is my guess. And there's a lot of work for us to do between now and then to kind of get through where we're at, coming back with policies and goals, as we talked about, purpose statements, talking about land outside the boundary that might come in, and kind of thoughts around that with all the layers of the state process and goal 14. Those pieces will have to be discussed. We also will likely have a Spanish language summit in August, September. We have a date possibly in August, but I'm not sure if we can get Baker Prairie at that time, but we're working on doing that, and that's to inform those Spanish speakers. And I was very pleased that there were several folks that showed up to the summit, and we did have an interpreter there. That was awesome. So that was a really good connection point.
Will that be Spanish only or?
Spanish only,
Okay.
yeah. And so like, if you want to brush up on your Spanish, yeah, you're welcome to participate. So, but yeah, that's another input that's important. I mean, it's a large portion of our population here, so that's important here. And that was it. I just wanted to mention, we will not be having a planning commission on July 8th. And since we don't have any hearings or other items, we will not have one on the 22nd either of July. So July is off. So we don't have any items really. We'll be coming back in August. Ryan will be coming back.
Yeah, you have to listen to me talk about fencing again in August, sorry.
I think that's August 12th, and so that's.
Which date in July are you going to talk about that?
No, August.
All right.
You guys love it.
I expect dioramas on the next one.
I love that idea.
All right, fantastic.
And that,
I
so,
didn't notice
Lego
many
kits.
fences in those pictures we were looking at tonight.
so that's coming back. Yeah. Trying to get that through as well. That's another goal. It's actually another goal for the council. So we got to get that through the process and, finish that off. So if there's questions, glad to answer them, but that's it for tonight. Thank you all for your help and, discussing. I know this is an interactive piece, and it's important for us to hear what you have to say as we move this forward.
Walnut Street bypass.
I spoke on your behalf in the
Yeah,
last meeting,
yeah.
just so you know. Did you want?
I think it's still moving.
It's still moving forward.
It's moving forward. It's not delayed.
When's it going to move all the way to 99 and have a light in?
I think that I'm believing it's going out to bid early next year is the hope, and that's really where things are at. So, and we're also on our end of things, because it's important for everything we're doing. It kind of integrates with our comp plan work that we're doing as well, and that's an important piece that we're dealing with. I mean, we want that for all the reasons, traffic relief, that area developing in a positive way, all that is important.
Is ODOT and the railroad, are they the ones dealing with the crossing there by the fairgrounds, or is that Canby that, and ODOT and the railroad that are going to rework that intersection?
It is a combination. There's UP and there's ODOT, which they control the main part of that intersection. I mean, Canby does have parts of that are important to us as well, that left-hand turn. Hopefully that will be resolved. That's kind of a challenge there. There are some other conceptual, going further back to the fairgrounds, some conceptual layouts to alleviate further forth and that whole pinch point that the city is working on. So that's the piece the city is involved with. The actual interchange with the left-hand turn conflict thing is, that's ODOT and us, but that's a longer-term play than the one that we're looking at beyond that intersection. It's immediately beyond it,
So we'll see Walnut completed before we even come close.
Well,
to
there might be similar timing for the piece that's near the fairgrounds.
Okay.
Yeah, Pine and Fourth, that might be, and I can't speak for Public Works, but I believe that is, it's probably similar timing, but not the left turn piece that you're probably thinking about, I'm thinking about.
Bane of our existence.
We'll see the new sports complex before we see Walnut Bypass done.
With that, do you have any other
Did I say
items,
that out loud?
any other items of interest or guidance you want to issue? Oh, sorry,
I've got
question.
mine.
Was there a
I
question?
do.
I do too, but you can go.
You go.
I just wanted to ask that we keep on our radar a discussion about the alleys versus roads, and what was the other one? Oh, our definition of open space, what it's actually used for, little patches of grass.
Yeah, I didn't
Perhaps
forget
not.
that, so.
Yeah, from our
But-
discussion earlier, it seemed like it's kind of on your radar, but I'd like to codify something.
For sure. Did you see that, I think it was the Urban Renewal District passed a package of funding for several of the alleys? Did you see that?
I did not.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to find that and forward it to you.
Yeah, if you could, please, I'd appreciate it.
I had a couple quickies. One was urban renewal. At the Baker Prairie session, the people at my table, some of the things that came up from a transportation perspective were talked about, I think, last year, maybe the year before, for urban renewal funding. So how is that going to mix when we're working on a traffic study or traffic plan, when there are things that might be funded that way? You know what I mean? They were asking me, why hasn't this happened? Why hasn't this happened? Why hasn't this happened? I said, well, that's urban renewal funding, but it's part of what they consider transportation. I don't know how to answer that. They were asking about access, like from the logging road down to 99, things, that would affect, transportation or walking, I guess.
I don't think I have a great answer for you, except for all that input we're taking in for the
Okay.
TSP, because the TSP is meant to be a comprehensive look at all kinds of transportation, so we welcome all that.
But it could be
input.
that some of what ends up in the TSP are funded different ways, like
Yeah.
some could be urban renewal funds and some could be, okay.
For sure.
And the other one's just a kind of an unrelated FYI. They're moving a house tomorrow from 10th down Ivy to Maxburg down Maxburg. So tomorrow and Thursday.
How
So,
they gonna get across Ivy? It's closed.
well, maybe they're not going to go exactly Ivy, but I don't know. Do you know? I don't know. Well, they're going to let them through Ivy? I have no idea.
Thank you for that.
We have the person that can answer that question.
Hello. I have been working on this little project for about 2.5 weeks, trying
Wow.
to get everything
So this is
going for 'em.
Emmert. They know what they're doing.
Yes, they do. They're going to start tomorrow morning at about 7:30, showing up over there on 10th to load everything up, and then they're going to wait a little while, but they're going to travel down Ivy to Southeast 3rd, and then end up in the fairgrounds parking lot to wait for the 9:30 a.m. Amtrak. And
Oh, my gosh.
then, once it goes by, Union Pacific is going to get flaggers out there and help them across.
Are they
Pine.
taking down all the power lines and,
No,
no?
no. They're just like right below it. The only one that they may have to raise up is the cable across Township.
And this is happening tomorrow morning.
Yes,
And
there's
Thursday.
2 days.
The Maxburg
Tomorrow.
piece is Thursday.
Yeah, tomorrow and Thursday,
That's my neck of the woods.
same time.
How cool is that? Okay.
I know, it doesn't happen very often.
Just because a house wanted to move?
It's where the last stage of the Northwoods subdivision is. There was an older house that was located on one of those properties, and so the developer is moving that so that they can do the last phase of their subdivision.
So when somebody moves a house and all this has to happen, all this coordination and everything, is there a price that the house vendor
Yes.
pays?
When something like that needs to happen and a house is being moved, does the person moving the house or the company moving the house pay everybody who's involved to coordinate all this and move wires and all this
Yep.
noise?
Yep.
You're saying yes, and they're saying no.
No.
So you can just move a house
did
and
up
cause a
on the
ruckus
hill.
and we
The-
just say, okay.
The permit is $50.
Maybe that should be revisited at some point.
Apparently you need to move a house in Canby, because that is not the case in Portland.
I remember when they built out
We need to
Timber,
revisit our fees.
when they built out Timber Park on 13th, there was one remaining house that got moved to Barlow. I remember that. Yeah. Anyway, $1.
In Portland, that was not the case.
Didn't they sell the school out there at,
The old one, Karis?
yeah, for $1?
Yeah.
But they had to move it by.
Yeah, they had to move it, yep.
Yeah, they moved it through some fields.
But all the way down Maxburg blows my mind. Anyway, sorry, that was just a public announcement.
That was a good one.
I move we close.
Any seconds?
I second it. And
All in
vote aye.
favor? Aye. We are officially closed. Thank you.
Thanks.